The wedding was perfect. The flowers were white. The candles were lit. 300 guests sat in silk-covered chairs inside the most expensive ballroom in Seoul, South Korea, waiting for the most feared man in Asia to finally take a bride. John Siwon, billionaire crime lord, untouchable, stood at the altar in a black tuxedo that cost more than most people's houses. His jaw was carved from stone. His eyes were cold. His hands did not shake. He did not shake for anything. But when the doors opened and the music swelled and every single head in that room turned, the bride who walked down the aisle was not the woman he had chosen. She was not the elegant Korean socialite his mother had selected. She was not the political connection, the strategic alliance, the woman chosen to strengthen his empire. She was a Ghanaian woman in ivory silk with natural hair pinned up with tiny gold flowers and eyes that looked like they had already seen the worst of him and decided to walk toward him anyway. The entire room went silent. His lieutenant leaned in and whispered, "Boss, do you know her?" Siwon did not answer for a long moment. His eyes moved over her face, the curve of her jaw, the way she held her chin up even though 300 strangers were staring at her like she had walked into the wrong century, and something cracked open behind his ribs that had been sealed shut for years. He knew her. He just didn't know how, and when she reached the altar and looked up at him with those dark, unflinching eyes, she whispered something that nobody else in the room could hear. "You owe me a debt, John Siwon, and I've come to collect." The room exploded. His mother stood. His advisors reached for phones. His ex-bride's family stormed toward the aisle. 3 of his bodyguards drew weapons. And Siwon, the man who had never once smiled in public, looked at this woman he didn't remember and somehow, without knowing why, raised his hand to stop every single one of them. "Stand down," he said quietly. "All of you. Before we begin, my mom said this video cannot reach 10,000 views and 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong. Smash that like button, subscribe right now, and drop in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let's get into this story. 6 weeks earlier, Seoul, South Korea, Adwoa and Siwon had exactly 3 problems. The first was that her appendix had decided to stage a full rebellion at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in a country where she had been living for exactly 11 months, with health insurance that covered approximately nothing useful. The second was that the hospital in Gangnam, the nicest one, the one her coworker had dragged her to because it was closest, had quoted her a surgery fee that made her laugh out loud before she remembered she was in pain. The third was that she had apparently collapsed in the lobby while arguing with the billing desk, which meant she was now lying in a hospital bed, hooked to an 4, with 0 say in what happened next. Well, she thought, staring at the ceiling with the calm clarity of someone running a fever, at least the ceiling is very clean. Ms. Mensah, a doctor in a white coat, appeared beside her bed. Young, efficient, no nonsense. He had the expression of someone who delivered bad news regularly and had stopped feeling bad about it. "Your appendix needs to come out tonight. We cannot wait." "Great," Adwoa said. "Wonderful. Super. How much?" He told her. She stared at him. "I'm sorry," she said, very politely. "I think you accidentally added an extra 0. "I did not." "Okay." She closed her eyes. "Okay, so I'm going to die in South Korea. That's fine. I always wanted to be dramatic. Ms. Mensah, my mother is going to be devastated. She spent 30 years telling me not to leave Accra, and I told her I was going to build a life abroad, and apparently what I built was a hospital bill that could purchase a small car. Ms. Mensah," the doctor's voice shifted slightly. "Your bill has been settled." She opened her eyes. "I'm sorry, your bill." He checked the tablet in his hand. All of it. Surgery, post-operative care, private room, medication, settled in full. About 20 minutes ago. Adwoa sat up so fast the 4 tugged. "By who?" The doctor looked slightly uncomfortable, which was the first human expression he'd made since entering the room. The payment came through a private account. The name on file is... He squinted. John Group Holdings. The name meant nothing to her. I don't know anyone named John, she said. Apparently, the doctor said carefully, in the voice of someone who did not want to get involved, someone named John knows you. Adwoa and Siwon was 29 years old, 5'4", and had not survived growing up in Accra, earning a scholarship to study architecture in London and relocating to Seoul on her own to be rattled by mysterious bill payers. She was, however, deeply nosy. It was her best and worst quality. She knew this. Her grandmother had called it the spirit of a woman who needs to know everything, which was either a gift or a curse depending on the day. Tonight, apparently, it was going to be a gift. She waited until the nurse came to prep her for surgery. She smiled her most charming smile, the one that had once gotten her a free upgrade on a flight from Accra to Dubai, and asked very sweetly if there was any more information about the person who had paid her bill. The nurse, who was young and clearly new and therefore not yet immune to Adwoa's charm, whispered one sentence before leaving. "Miss, you really don't want to ask questions about that family," which naturally meant Adwoa was going to ask every single question she could think of the moment she was recovered enough to walk. She went into surgery at 3 a.m., with a stranger's money keeping her alive and a stranger's name circling her mind like a song she almost recognized. John. She woke up 6 hours later in the nicest private hospital room she had ever been in. Fresh flowers on the nightstand, a view of the Han River, a robe so soft it felt like gilt. On the table beside her bed was a single card. No name, no number, just 4 words written in clean, precise English. Consider the debt repaid. Adwoa read it twice. Then she reached for the call button, got the nurse, and said with complete composure, "I need to know who sent this card. And before you tell me I shouldn't ask questions, I'm Ghanaian. Asking questions is a constitutional right." The nurse blinked. Then, against what was clearly her better judgment, she almost smiled. The name John Siwon appeared on approximately 12 news articles and 0 personal social media accounts. Adwoa, sitting up in her hospital bed with her phone, a cup of ginger tea, and the focus of a woman who had once pulled an all-nighter to finish a structural design model on deadline, read every single one. CEO of John Group Holdings, real estate, logistics, private security, philanthropist, reclusive, unmarried, estimated net worth, unknown, rumored, staggering. There were exactly 2 photos of him publicly available. One was a grainy image from a charity gala 5 years ago. Tall man in a dark suit, face slightly turned away from the camera, like someone who had spent his whole life practicing how to avoid being seen. The other was a press release headshot, jaw like architecture, eyes like a winter morning, beautiful and completely uninviting. Adwoa said out loud. She scrolled further. The 12th article, buried under layers of business coverage and society page filler, was from a tabloid. The headline, translated from Korean by her phone's browser, "Is John Siwon connected to the Shadow Syndicate?" Sources say yes. She put her phone down. Then she picked it back up. Shadow Syndicate was not a term she was unfamiliar with. 11 months in Seoul had taught her things that 11 months in Accra never would have, including the fact that the city's glittering surface had a very organized, very powerful, and very dangerous underside. She had, until this moment, successfully avoided that underside. Had being the operative word. "Okay," she said to herself, pulling her knees to her chest. "So a possibly Mafia billionaire paid for my emergency surgery in the middle of the night, for no apparent reason, and left a card that said consider the debt repaid." She paused. Which implies there was a debt, which implies we have a history. Another pause, which I cannot account for. Her appendix, from wherever it was being disposed of, offered no clarification. She was still frowning at her phone when the door opened. He did not knock. That was the first thing she noticed. Not that he was tall, not that he was obscenely good-looking in person, not that he was wearing a coat that probably cost as much as her surgery. The first thing she noticed was that he walked into her hospital room like it was a room he owned, with the quiet certainty of someone who had never once in his life been asked to wait. He stopped when he saw she was awake. She looked at him. He looked at her. Something crossed his face, something quick and complicated that he locked away before she could name it. "You're awake," he said. His English was accented, low, and precise. Exceptionally, Adwoa said, "Would you like to tell me why you paid for my surgery? Or should I guess? Because I have a theory, and it involves either a case of mistaken identity or you being a very unusual stalker." He blinked, just once. She got the feeling he wasn't used to people talking to him like this. Good, she thought. Someone should. "We've met before," he said. "Have we?" "I believe so." "Funny," she said, tilting her head. "Because I have an excellent memory, and I'm fairly certain I would remember." She gestured at him, at the general overwhelming situation of him. All of this. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The ghost of the concept of a smile. "7 years ago," he said. "Nairobi." The word landed like a stone in still water. Adwoa went very quiet. Nairobi. 7 years ago she had been 22, fresh out of her second year of university, spending the summer with her aunt who worked for a development NGO. She had been impulsive and idealistic and absolutely certain she could navigate any city on her own. She had been partially right. She had also, on one particular night, made a decision in a dark alley behind a restaurant on the edge of the city that she had never told another living soul about. She stared at John Siwon. He stared back. "The alley," she said softly. It wasn't a question. "The alley," he confirmed. The monitor beside her bed beeped steadily into the silence. "You were bleeding," she said. "Yes." "And you told me not to call anyone." "Yes." "And I called someone anyway." "Yes." His voice was unreadable. "You saved my life, Miss Mensah. I spent 4 years trying to find you to repay that. When I found out you were in Seoul." He stopped. "The surgery was the least I could do." Adwoa looked at this man, this powerful, impossible, secretly Mafia man, and felt the universe doing something deeply unfair and entirely unreasonable, because she remembered now. She remembered the blood. She remembered pressing her scarf against the wound and arguing with a stranger who kept telling her to leave him, and refusing because she was 22 and stubborn and couldn't leave a person bleeding in an alley. She remembered that even then, through the pain, he had looked at her like she was something he didn't have a category for. "You're welcome," she said finally. "I know. And we're even—" Something shifted behind his eyes. "Are we?" The monitor kept beeping. Outside the window, Seoul glittered like it always did, beautiful and dangerous, and full of things happening just below the surface. "I'd like you to have dinner with me," John Siwon said. "When you're recovered." Adwoa Mensah had 3 problems this morning. She had a feeling she was about to acquire a 4th. "I haven't said yes," she told him. "You haven't said no," he said. And then, insufferable man, he turned and walked out of her hospital room exactly the way he had walked in, like he owned it, like he owned everything. Adwoa looked at the card on her nightstand. "Consider the debt repaid." She picked up her phone and texted her best friend back in Accra. "Akojua, you will not believe what just happened to me." She said yes. She told herself it was because she was curious. She told herself it was because she was a practical woman, and a free dinner in Seoul was a free dinner in Seoul. She told herself it had absolutely nothing to do with the way he had looked at her before he left, like she was a problem he very much wanted to solve. She was lying to herself on all three counts. The restaurant he chose was the kind of place that had no menu on the door and no sign above the entrance, which Adwoa had learned in 11 months meant either very exclusive or very illegal. And in this city, those two things were not mutually exclusive. She wore a green wrap dress and her hair down, big, natural, glorious, and gold hoops that her mother had given her. She refused to dress down for anyone, and she absolutely refused to dress up in a way that suggested she was trying. She was slightly trying. He was already there when she arrived. Standing, not sitting, she noticed that. He stood when she walked in, not the performative stand of a man following social rules, but something that looked involuntary, like her entering a room activated something in him he hadn't approved. She filed that information away. "You look," he started. "I know," she said pleasantly, sitting down. "What are we eating?" His mouth did the ghost smile thing again. "I ordered for both of us." "Bold," she said. "What if I'm vegetarian?" "You're not." She narrowed her eyes. "Are you having me investigated?" "I asked your co-worker." "Which co-worker?" "Park Ji-yeon," she said, and I quote, "Adwoa would eat a shoe if it was cooked well enough." Adwoa pressed her lips together to stop from laughing. Ji-yeon was going to get a very aggressive phone call tomorrow. "Fine," she said, "but if I don't like it, you're buying me something else." "Agreed." He sat across from her, and for a moment they just looked at each other across a candlelit table with the whole complicated weight of 7 years and an alley in Nairobi sitting between them. "Ask your questions," he said. "You knew I had questions. You're vibrating with them." "I am a very still person." "Ms. Mensah." "Adwoa," she corrected. "If you paid for my internal organs to remain internal, you can use my first name." She folded her hands on the table. "Are you in the Mafia?" "Not a flicker." "That's a complicated question." "It's a yes or no question." "Very few things in my life are yes or no." "That's a yes," she said. The faintest exhale. "My family has connections. I manage certain operations that exist outside conventional law." "So yes." She nodded. "Okay, good to know. Second question, why did you spend 4 years looking for me? You could have just not." He was quiet for a moment. The candle between them flickered. "I don't leave debts unpaid," he said. "That's the professional answer." Another pause. Longer this time. "You were 22 years old," he said, finally, "in a city that wasn't yours, in a situation you didn't understand, and you stayed." His voice was careful, deliberate, like a man choosing each word like it mattered. "Most people run. You stayed, and you argued with me, and you were so—" He stopped. "Annoying," she offered helpfully. "Alive," he said. "You were so alive." The word fell into the space between them like something breakable. Adwoa looked at him, really looked at him, past the coat and the controlled expression and the impossible cheekbones, and saw a man who had probably spent a very long time in rooms where people did exactly what he wanted, and didn't quite know what to do in this one. Good, she thought again, but softer this time. The food came. It was extraordinary, she told him. So because she was not going to pretend otherwise, she had principles, not pride. "Your co-worker was right," he said. "Ji-yeon is dead to me," Adwoa said serenely, and ate another bite. He laughed. It was small, barely a sound, but it was real, and it changed his entire face. And Adwoa felt something shift in her chest that she had absolutely no interest in examining right now. "Thank you." They talked for 3 hours. She told him about the Accra, about her grandmother's house with the mango tree in the yard, about the scholarship in London, and the cold that had almost sent her home, about Seoul and the architecture firm, and the way this city made her feel like she was always standing at the edge of something enormous. He listened in a way that men rarely did, not waiting for his turn to speak, but actually listening like what she said mattered, and he was storing it somewhere. He told her about his family's business, carefully, selectively, Enough to be honest without being reckless. He told her about his father, who had built the empire, and the weight of inheriting something that could not be put down. She did not ask him how many people he had hurt. She would, but not tonight. When they stepped outside, the city was humming around them, and his car was waiting, and his bodyguard, who had been eating at the bar the entire time pretending to be a regular customer, materialized from the shadows. "I'm not scared of you," Adwoa told him at the car door. "I know," he said. "I should probably be scared of you. Probably. But I'm not." She tilted her head. "Does that bother you?" He looked at her for a long moment, long enough that the city noise seemed to drop away. "No," he said quietly. "It's the most comfortable I've felt in years." She got in the car before her face could do anything embarrassing. But in the dark, as Seoul scrolled past the window, she allowed herself exactly 5 seconds of feeling something enormous and terrifying and wonderful. And then she put it away. Focus. Adwoa, she told herself. The man is in the Mafia. Her heart said. So? She was in serious trouble. He sent flowers the next morning. Not roses. She noticed that immediately. Not the generic romantic gesture of a man who had an assistant do his feeling for him. He sent bird of paradise flowers, orange and sharp and unapologetic, with a card that said, "These seemed like you." Adwoa stood in her apartment doorway in her pajamas, flowers in her arms, and said out loud to her empty apartment, "This is not fair." Her apartment did not disagree. They fell into something that resisted being named. It was not dating. Exactly. Though he took her to dinner again, and then to a private gallery opening where she critiqued every single architectural choice in the building while he listened with an expression she was starting to recognize as his version of delight. It was not friendship, though she called him on a Wednesday afternoon to argue about whether a building she'd seen in Mapogu was innovative or just pretentious, and he picked up on the first ring and had a fully formed opinion. It was not nothing. It was definitely not nothing. He showed up at her office one afternoon with lunch because she had texted Jion, who had apparently become a Siwon informant, the traitor that she hadn't eaten. He appeared in the lobby in a black coat, looking devastating and slightly awkward, holding a bag from the restaurant near the Han River she'd mentioned once in passing. "You remembered," she said. "I remember everything you say," he said, simply, like it was obvious. She stared at him. Her co-worker Jion was watching from behind a plant. "You can't just say things like that," Adwoa told him. "Why not?" "Because," she stopped. She genuinely didn't have an answer. "Because it's a lot. You told me in Nairobi that I was going to die in an alley, and that would be very inconvenient for you." He said, "That was also a lot. I survived." "That is not the same thing. Have lunch with me." "I'm at work." "You have 40 minutes. I checked with Jion." "Jion." Adwoa pointed at the plant. The plant rustled guiltily. She had lunch with him. The first time he took her hand was at the night market in Insadong. They'd been walking through the stalls. She was examining a fabric merchant's display with the focus of someone who had grown up watching her grandmother assess cloth at Makola Market when he reached over and took her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. She looked down at their joined hands, her deep brown against his warm gold. She looked up at him. He was looking at the stalls, deliberately not looking at her. She decided not to make it a thing, but she also didn't let go. They walked through the whole market like that, and he bought her a small ceramic dish painted with something that looked vaguely like flowers because she said it was pretty, and when she tried to pay for it, he looked at her the way only a man who controlled a criminal empire could look at someone trying to split a $7 bill, and she pocketed her card and called him ridiculous. "I'm not ridiculous," he said. "You made a face at my wallet like it had personally offended your ancestors." It had. She laughed. He watched her laugh. She caught him watching and raised an eyebrow. He looked away, but she could see it the barely there smile that was becoming her favorite thing in the entire city of Seoul. The first kiss happened in the rain. Of course it did. The universe had absolutely no subtlety. They'd been walking back from a late dinner when the sky opened up. No warning, full Seoul summer downpour, and they ducked under the awning of a closed bookshop. His bodyguard materialized with an umbrella from somewhere, as bodyguards apparently did, but they were already soaked and laughing. She was laughing loud and real, and he was trying not to, and failing. "Your hair," he said. "Do not," she warned. "It's Siwon, I swear." "Beautiful," he said. She stopped. The rain hammered the awning. The street was empty. He was looking at her, the way he'd looked at her in the hospital room, like she was something he didn't have a category for, and he'd stopped trying to find one. "I'm going to need you to stop doing that," she said. "Doing what?" "Looking at me like," she waved her hand. "Like that." "Like what?" His voice was very quiet. "Like I'm something worth looking at." Something moved across his face, something raw and unguarded that she suspected very few people had ever been allowed to see. "You are," he said, "the most worth looking at person I've ever seen." The rain kept falling. She kissed him first. She wasn't going to wait. She was never going to be the woman who waited when she knew what she wanted, and she wanted this, wanted him, with a certainty that had been building since a hospital bed, and a card that said consider the debt repaid. He kissed her back like he'd been waiting, like the 7 years and the alley and the flowers and the lunches had all been leading here to this awning in this rain, in this city that never slept. When they finally pulled apart, his forehead dropped to hers. "Adwoa," he said, just her name, like it meant something. "I know," she said. Outside, Seoul glittered in the rain, beautiful and complicated, and entirely indifferent to two people discovering that the debt between them ran much deeper than either had expected. She was in trouble, the spectacular, heart-first kind. She met his mother on a Thursday. She had not been warned. She had, in fact, been told they were going to Siwon's home for dinner, a development that was itself significant enough, given that she had established through careful investigation that he virtually never brought anyone to his personal residence. She had dressed accordingly, something elegant, but also undeniably, unapologetically herself. She was not prepared to walk into his dining room and find a woman who looked like she had been assembled by a committee specifically dedicated to making people feel they had arrived wearing entirely the wrong shoes. John Suyin, Siwon's mother, was 63 years old, immaculate, and possessed of the kind of stillness that powerful people cultivated like a weapon. She looked at Adwoa. Adwoa looked back. "Okay," Adwoa thought. "Challenge accepted." "Ms. Mensah," Siwon's mother said, in English that was precise and deliberate. "I understand you're an architect." "I am." Adwoa smiled, her most radiant smile. "I specialize in structural design, the kind where you make sure nothing that's supposed to stand up falls down." A pause. Something that might have been appreciation moved through the older woman's eyes. "Siwon tells me you're from Ghana." "Accra, yes, born and raised." "And your family?" "My grandmother sells fabric at Makola Market. My mother teaches secondary school mathematics. My father is an engineer." She kept her voice warm and easy. "We are entirely ordinary and completely extraordinary, as Ghanaian families tend to be." Siwon, beside her, had gone very still in the way of a man watching a storm from a window and not being sure whether to be terrified or awed. His mother studied Adwoa for a long moment. Then she said in Korean, which Adwoa understood approximately 40% of, enough for the general shape of things. "She doesn't bow." Siwon said something back. Adwoa caught one word. "Stronger." She stored that away in the category labeled things to revisit when alone. Dinner was, if not warm, at least not hostile. Suyin asked sharp questions, and Adwoa answered every single one without flinching, because she had been raised by a woman who had navigated across school board politics and could recognize a power test when she saw one. She also complimented the food 3 times because it was genuinely extraordinary, and she saw no reason to perform indifference about something delicious. When Siwon walked her to the car, afterward, she could feel him choosing his words. "You survived," he said. "Thrived," she corrected. "Your mother respects direct people. I am the most direct person I know." She glanced at him. "She doesn't approve of me. She doesn't approve of most things. But specifically me." He was quiet for a moment. "She worries that my life isn't safe for." "For who?" Adwoa stopped walking. "Siwon. I was 22 years old, and I crouched in a dark alley in Nairobi and argued with a bleeding stranger until help came. I am not fragile." His jaw worked. "I know. Do you? That's not what worries me." His voice was lower now, quieter. "What worries me is that I want you in my life, all the way in. And my life has parts that I cannot change. And I cannot." He stopped. "I don't want you to be collateral damage." "Then make sure I'm not," she said simply. He stared at her. "I'm serious," she said. "You have an entire empire and an entire team of terrifying people in nice suits. Apply them to keeping me safe. That's not naivety. Siwon, that's logistics." The ghost smile. Fuller this time. Almost a real one. "You're remarkable," he said. "I'm practical," she corrected, "which is better." She reached up and straightened the collar of his coat. A small, deliberate gesture, the kind of thing a woman does when she's decided something. "Now take me home. I have a site visit tomorrow, and I need sleep." He took her home, but he held her hand the whole drive, and when she got out at her building, he stayed until he saw her lights come on. She stood at her window and looked down at the car and felt the whole weight of what was happening. The size of it, the danger of it, the extraordinary, impractical, irreversible fact of it. And she decided, all the way in. 2 weeks later, someone put a knife through her apartment window. Not literally, it was a message, folded around a blade, delivered in the night. She woke to the sound of broken glass and found it on her kitchen floor. The message was in Korean. She photographed it and sent it to Siwon. His response came in 47 seconds. "Don't touch anything. I'm coming." He arrived in 12 minutes with 4 men and a fury she could feel from across the room. He checked her, hands on her face, eyes moving over her like inventory, making sure she was whole before he even looked at the message. "It's a warning," he said. "Someone who wants to remind me what I have to lose. So this is my fault." She was not scared. She was angry. "Your enemies are throwing things through my window. I'll move you." "John Siwon, if you say anything about moving me without asking me where I want to go." "Adwoa." His hands were on her face again. His eyes, usually so controlled, were not controlled at all right now. "I need you safe. Tell me what safe looks like." She looked at him, at the fear he was letting her see. "Together," she said. "Safe looks like together. Don't make decisions for me. Make them with me." He exhaled, long and slow. "Move in with me," he said. "That's still a decision." "I'm asking." His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. "I'm asking Adwoa, please." The kitchen was cold from the broken window. Outside, his men were moving efficiently through her building. "Yes," she said, "but I'm bringing all my fabric samples, and you cannot complain about them taking up space." Something broke open in his face. Full, real, a smile. So genuine it looked like it surprised him. She decided that smile was worth every single complication. Living with John Siwon was, she had to be honest, simultaneously the most exasperating and most quietly beautiful thing she had ever done. He woke at 5 a.m. every morning, without an alarm, like his body had simply decided sleep was a limited resource for the weak. She woke at 7:30 a.m. and defended this to anyone who challenged it on the grounds that her brain required full charging like a high-end piece of equipment. He was neat in a way that suggested mild psychological structure. Everything in its place, systems for systems. She was organized in the way of a person with many active projects, which meant the dining table had become a permanent satellite office, and the living room occasionally hosted fabric swatches. He moved her fabric swatches once. Once. She said nothing. She simply relocated his meticulously arranged desk pen set to a slightly different position every morning until he noticed, which took 4 days, at which point he stood in the study doorway and looked at her with an expression of profound exhaustion. "Point made," he said. "Was there a point?" she said innocently. "I thought I was just helping." "You're impossible. You move my things. They were on the dinner table. That's where they live." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "They're fabric samples, Adwoa. They are the physical documentation of a 12-project workload, and I will not be made to feel bad about that." She handed him his coffee. He accepted it. Their fingers touched. Some of the exhaustion left his face. "I'll get a proper sample cabinet," she offered. "I already ordered one." "Of course you did." She shook her head. "You're ridiculous. You've said that before." "I will keep saying it until it stops being true." She kissed his cheek. She did this easily, now, naturally, like her body had decided it was simply part of how she moved through her day, and went to get her own coffee. Behind her, she heard him exhale. The soft kind, the one she was learning meant content. His world kept trying to intrude. There were nights he came home with his jaw set and his eyes flat in a way that meant something difficult had happened, and he was processing it in that sealed room way of his. She learned not to push. Not because she was afraid, but because she understood the way she understood load-bearing walls, that some structures needed to settle before you touched them. She would make tea. She would put on something quiet in the background. She would sit near him, not against him, not demanding warmth, just near, until the sealed room began to open on its own. He always talked eventually, never everything, but enough. And when he talked, she listened the way he listened to her, storing everything, making it matter. "My father built this," he told her one night. They were on the roof terrace, the city below them, his hand in hers. He built it from nothing, from very little, and then from fear, and then from loyalty. And by the time I inherited it, I didn't know how to put it down without it all. He stopped. "Collapsing," she supplied. "Yes. Like a building with bad foundations." She tilted her head. "You can reinforce foundations, while the building is still standing. It takes longer and it's harder, but it doesn't require demolition." He looked at her, the way he always looked at her, like she was something he didn't have a category for. "Is that what you're doing?" he asked. "Reinforcing my foundations." "I'm an architect," she said simply. "It's what I do." He brought her hand to his mouth, pressed his lips to her knuckles, kept her hand there. "I love you," he said into her skin. The city hummed. Stars, the few souls light aloud, hung above them. She turned to look at him. He was looking at her, open, unguarded, the most unguarded she had ever seen him. "I know," she said softly. "I love you too." His exhale shook slightly. Just slightly. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat there above the city that had somehow, improbably become hers, above the empire and the danger and the night market and the hospital that had started everything. And she thought, this is what built things feel like from the inside. Warm, solid, worth protecting. He proposed on an ordinary Tuesday, not at a restaurant, not on a rooftop, in the kitchen, at 7:45 a.m., while she was arguing with her phone about a project timeline, and he was making coffee. He simply set a small box on the counter in front of her. She stopped talking mid-sentence. The ring was gold, not the expected white gold or platinum, but warm, deep gold, set with a green stone that matched, almost exactly, the dress she'd worn on their first dinner. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. He was leaning against the counter with his coffee, watching her, and he looked, for the first time she could remember, genuinely nervous, the smallest tension around his eyes. "John Siwon," she said. "Adwoa and Siwon," he said. "Are you proposing to me in the kitchen?" "Yes." "You haven't said anything." "I'm saying it now." He set down his coffee. "I am saying I want this. Every morning. Every argument about where things live. Every time you make me laugh when I don't mean to. Every time you tell me something true that I didn't want to hear. I want all of it." He paused. "Will you marry me?" She looked at the ring. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "Obviously, yes. Did you really think I was going to say no?" "I thought there was a significant probability." "Siwon." She walked around the counter and took his face in her hands. "You paid for my appendix. You sent me bird of paradise flowers. You ordered a sample cabinet without making me ask. You learned my grandmother's name, and you remember every single thing I've ever told you." She searched his face. "You're the most impossible man I've ever met, and I've been in love with you since that bookshop in the rain, and I think you know that." His forehead came to rest against hers. "I know," he said. "I just needed to hear you say yes." She kissed him until the coffee got cold. The wedding was perfect. The flowers were white. The candles were lit. 300 guests sat in silk-covered chairs inside the most expensive ballroom in Seoul, South Korea, waiting for the most feared man in Asia to finally take a bride. And the bride who walked down the aisle was Adwoa and Siwon, Ghanaian, brilliant, infuriating, irreplaceable, in ivory silk, with natural hair pinned up with tiny gold flowers, and eyes that had chosen him with the same terrifying certainty she chose everything. This is the part the story didn't tell you in the beginning. This is the part the hook left out, because what looked like scandal was actually salvation. What looked like a stranger walking toward him was the woman who had always been walking toward him. Since Nairobi, since the alley, since an emergency room at 3 a.m. where someone paid a debt that wasn't even money. The room had gone silent because nobody had been invited to expect her. His mother had not been consulted. His board had not approved. The socialite his family had preferred had been quietly, firmly, respectfully given an exit 6 weeks ago, when Siwon had looked at his mother across a dinner table and said, in the flat, certain way of a man who had decided, "I have found the person I want to stand next to for the rest of my life. I'm telling you as a courtesy." His mother had looked at him for a long moment. Then she had said, "She doesn't bow." And Siwon had said, "No, and I don't want her to." At the altar, with the room in chaos around them and his bodyguard's hand on his earpiece and his mother standing and his lieutenant whispering and 300 people all suddenly having opinions, Adwoa looked at him. He looked at her. "You owe me a debt," she'd whispered, "and I've come to collect." And when he'd raised his hand and told his entire empire to stand down, when he turned back to her and said, quietly in the small space between them where only she could hear, "I do." Not to the officiant, not yet, but to her, to the question she'd been asking since the hospital room and the rain and the kitchen and the Tuesday morning proposal. She had smiled. The full smile, the real one, the one that his mother had later admitted privately to her assistant was considerable. The ceremony was extraordinary. She had insisted on incorporating elements that were hers, Kent cloth woven into the decorations, a Ghanaian blessing spoken by her aunt who had flown in from Accra, her grandmother on video call from her house with the mango tree in the yard, crying and laughing simultaneously in the way of Ghanaian grandmothers who have been proven right about something. I always said, her grandmother told anyone who would listen, that child would find someone worthy of the trouble she causes. He had incorporated a small string quartet playing a Korean folk melody she'd told him once, months ago, reminded her of something her mother used to hum. He had remembered. Of course, he had remembered. She cried exactly twice, once during his vows, which he had written himself and which were, against all odds, quietly devastating, and once when he put the ring on her finger and looked at her with everything he'd never said in public open on his face. 300 people witnessed John Siwon look like a man who had found the one thing his empire couldn't buy and had no intention of ever letting it go. The reception was joyful and enormous and slightly chaotic in the way of events where two cultures meet and decide, mutually, that both have excellent taste in music and food and celebrating people they love. She danced with him. He was not a natural dancer, and she told him so, and he told her he had practiced, which meant someone had taught him, which she was going to investigate fully later. And they were terrible together in the best possible way, laughing too much to be graceful. His mother danced with her uncle. Nobody had expected this. Several people photographed it. Ji-yeon, traitor, informant, best friend, gave a speech that included the phrase, "I told him what she ate for lunch, and I regret nothing," and received a standing ovation. At some point past midnight, Siwon pulled her out to a balcony above the ballroom, and they stood together, his arms around her, looking at Seoul, their city, improbably, impossibly theirs. "We did it," she said. "We did it," he agreed. "Your mother almost smiled at me during the first dance." She did smile. I saw it. It was very small. It was the biggest she smiled at anyone in 15 years. Adwoa laughed. He pressed his lips to her temple. "Are you happy?" he asked. She thought about it, genuinely the way she thought about things that mattered. "Yes," she said, "completely. Are you?" "More than I thought was available to me," he said. "More than I knew to want." The city hummed below. Inside, the music was still going. She turned to face him. Her husband, this impossible, wonderful, organized to the point of being maddening man who had sent Bird of Paradise flowers and learned her grandmother's name and stood at an altar and raised his hand against his entire empire because she was the one walking toward him. "I love you," she said. "I know," he said, and kissed her. But here is the thing about empires. They do not stay quiet for long. And someone in that room tonight, among the 300 guests, among the people who had watched Adwoa and Siwon walk down that aisle and claim the most powerful man in Seoul's criminal world as hers, someone had taken out their phone. Someone had made a call. And the person on the other end of that call, in a room on the other side of the city, had listened and sat back and said nothing for a long moment, and then find out everything about the Ghanaian woman. In the honeymoon suite of the hotel, with Seoul glittering outside the floor-to-ceiling windows and her new husband's arms around her, and the whole long, beautiful, improbable chapter of this year finally exhaling into rest, Adwoa's phone lit up on the nightstand. A message. Unknown number. You think you know who he is. You don't. Ask him about Nairobi. Ask him what really happened that night. Ask him why he was really in that alley. And then ask yourself, was it an accident that he found you again? She stared at the message. Her heart, which had been full of nothing but warmth for the last 12 hours, did something complicated. She looked at her husband, at his face, peaceful for once, the control finally resting. She looked back at the message. Ask him what really happened that night. Outside, Seoul kept moving, and Adwoa and Siwon, now John, felt the foundation shift. Just slightly, just enough. To be continued in part 2. Drop in the comments, are you team it was always fate, or team she needs answers first? And where are you watching from? Let's get this to 10,000 views. Subscribe if you haven't already, and share this with one friend who needs a good story today. Part 2 is coming, and trust me, you are not ready for what happens next.